My fellow formators, teachers, and coaches, good afternoon. I'm here today just to share some of the experiences, lessons, and practices our varsity basketball team had this past school year. I do this in the hope that some of you, or all of you hopefully, will pick something meaningful up that you can use or adapt in your own context, in your own schools, in your own practices. And I also hope to learn from you in our discussion later on. Now, I've been privileged enough to serve the school, Ateneo de Manila, as a basketball coach for a few years now, coaching at the Passerelle, Aspirants, and Juniors divisions, and helping our teams to bring home a few titles and achieve some milestones. Last school year, I had the honor to serve as an assistant coach for our grade 9 basketball student athletes. And I want to first acknowledge our head coach, Reggie Arumin, and our basketball program head, Reggie Varilla, for their patience with and faith in me last year, and their openness for all the initiatives we tried in our grade 9 team. Before I formally share some of these initiatives, let me acknowledge something already obvious and yet so important, that we are in the midst of crisis. We are at odds against a virus that is invisible and highly transmissible. Our economy is barely getting by, the political horizon is bleak, and many of us are struggling with anxiety, hidden or otherwise, every single day. But we persist. We persist because we have chosen hope over fear and purpose over despair. In Ateneo de Manila, or in the language of Ateneo de Manila, we call this choosing one big fight. We choose one big fight. Now, I'm so proud of my fellow coaches and trainers who chose to carry forward our collective mission, not just as varsity coaches, but also as mentors, as formators in Ateneo de Manila. Despite all the barriers and uncertainty around us, we have to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and continue the work of reimagining how our varsity programs are and can be. Remember that the world has changed so much in just a year and a half. The challenges we're facing demand for all of us to be bold and audacious as we forge new paths ahead, not waiting for when the ground has shifted beneath us, or for the next pandemic to strike, or for the next element of disruption to come along. What is required of us now is to be adaptive and innovative, a recognition that we live in a different world than we did not even 2 years ago. And because the world has changed, so must we. Not our principles or values, mind you, but maybe our methods, our structures, maybe our means and tools. Now, many of the things I will share today are driven by this spirit, this desire to keep moving forward. Recall that in the past year alone, even if we went through so many trials and pains, there were also shining moments around the world. Glass ceilings were shattered, barriers were broken, trails were blazed, doors were opened, bars were raised, and things that were once just figments of imagination suddenly became reality. To illustrate, since I'm assuming most of us here are sports-minded individuals, we have Third Ravenna and eventually the Gomez de Llano brothers eventually going to Japan to play in the B-League. We have Gilas Pilipinas beating Korea not once but twice. We have our very own phenom Kai Soto signing with the NBL Australia to play for the Adelaide 36ers, the first ever homegrown Filipino to do such a thing. We also have Yuka Saso winning the USLPGA this year. Homegrown tennis sensation Alex Ayala being ranked number 2 girl tennis player in the whole world. We have EJ Obiena winning a pole vault gold medal in Sweden. And of course, well, even if he's not Filipino, we have Lionel Messi finally winning the Copa America. I hope that other examples will inspire us in our own vocation as teachers, formators, and coaches as well. And with that spirit, let me finally share some of the experiences, initiatives, and practices we had this past school year as part of our varsity program in the Ateneo de Manila Junior High School. First, one helpful practice we used was trying as much as possible to leverage what we called Google Classroom or Google Apps at our disposal, especially Google Classroom. Ateneo de Manila, of course, is a Google-enabled school. So it was natural for us to gravitate towards using Google Workspace apps. Google Classroom in particular was very useful, especially in terms of disseminating information and announcements, setting our training sessions and agenda, distributing assignments, and implementing our activities. Since our boys were already using Google Classroom as their primary LMS or learning management system in Ateneo de Manila, it was also a smooth adjustment for all of them to utilize it in the context of our varsity team's activities. For example, if there was an announcement, we'd post it on the classroom stream. If there was an asynchronous video we wanted them to watch and comment on, we'd assign it using Classroom and have them share their insights using Google Doc or Padlet. If we wanted them to update their skills and conditioning key performance indicators or KPIs, Google Classroom helped us track their progress. Speaking of skills and conditioning testing, that's another one of our central practices this past school year. Seeing as there was practically no chance of engaging in regular competition, especially for team sports like basketball, one of our primary mandates in the junior high varsity program was to ensure our student athletes could maintain and improve their physical conditioning and their skill levels. This we did mainly through our synchronous training sessions via Google Meet. Using a combination of Google Slides and YouTube, we curated videos that would exhibit the desired workouts or skill components we wanted to see in our players. Now, there was certainly some degree of adjustment early in the school year, but once we all got the hang of it, things proceeded quite smoothly. We tried to ensure, as much as possible, that our players' conditioning levels were improving throughout the year, measuring these using our testing standards. We measured different aspects of our players' physical conditioning, such as their flexibility, cardio rates, endurance, agility, speed, and power. These tests were curated and handpicked by our own pool of conditioning experts, namely coaches Aris Manalo and Edong Sonido. Aside from measuring our boys' physical conditioning, we also resolved to have what we called internal skills competitions among our team's members. Again, since regular inter-school leagues did not take place, we had to think of unique and novel ways to sustain the competitive fire in our players. Not necessarily to make them aggressive, but rather so they could continue to push each other to excel. I mean, that's of course the point of competition, right? For people to push other human beings to excellence. And we wanted to sustain that in our players. One example of this was having the boys count how many combination dribbles they could successfully execute in a given period of time. The player who could finish a target number the fastest, or the player with the highest number of successful repetitions in a set amount of time, would then win. This helped us ensure that we were providing opportunities for our players to both improve their skills and sustain their sense of competition. Now, beyond training and conditioning, we also went ahead with some other interesting initiatives. One such project we worked on this past school year was something I was deeply invested and interested in. You see, I'm a numbers guy, and I'm a big fan of using data to find ways for my teams to succeed. Of course, as a teacher and a varsity basketball coach, it was quite natural for me to work with data in the context of our student athletes. This is where our student athletes' well-being survey comes in. Remember that during the past school year, one of the elements of the school experience that kind of took a bad rap was varsity sports. Some stakeholders from across the spectrum wondered if it was still necessary to have athletics or varsity programs given that there would not really be any traditional sports leagues, tournaments, or competitions taking place. Well, I'm proud to say that in Ateneo de Manila, our response to that question, our position was yes. It was not only necessary to sustain our athletics and varsity programs, it was critical. This was not because of the tournaments or championships at stake, far from it. It was because of the message we would be sending. Remember that doing away with our athletics and varsity programs would essentially send one clear message, whether it's intended or not. That message is this: that our student athletes were non-essential. That all the time they spent training, improving themselves, getting better at their craft, hitting the gym, hitting their books, was non-essential. Again, whether it's intended or not, that is exactly the message we would be sending. And we didn't want that. And interestingly enough, the results of our student athletes' well-being survey supported that position. We had our junior and senior high student athletes from all sports take the simple Google Form survey, which included questions about student athletes' context, their overall wellness, their anxiety levels, their access to support, and many more. Crucial also was asking them about the effects of their training sessions and how their coaches have reached out and mentored them throughout the pandemic. Let me share some general insights from the Student Athletes Well-Being Survey. We found out that our student athletes' biggest concerns this past year were the following: the quality of training they'd be receiving, whether the time they were receiving to train was enough, whether sports will ever return or the leagues ever return, how long the pandemic would last, and of course, their school performance or their grades. It's clear that our student athletes derived much of their motivation and identity from their being involved in sports, which we felt supported our decision to continue with our athletics and varsity programs. Here are also two interesting correlations we found because of this study or this survey. First, coaches reaching out makes a huge difference. Student athletes whose coaches reached out to them to check on their wellness had a much higher chance, more than 20% chance, of sustaining high levels of motivation. Next, coaches sharing positive messages also makes a big difference. Student athletes whose coaches shared positive messages had a much lower chance, more than 20% chance, lower, of experiencing anxiety or high levels of anxiety. So again, how coaches interact and engage and reach out with or to their players can make a huge difference. And that's one reason why varsity programs are crucial, not only for sports itself, but to support the wellness of our student athletes. Remember that coaches are often seen as mentors, if not secondary parents, by many student athletes. And this proved how critical it was to sustain that relationship, especially during the pandemic. Without a doubt, these insights from our Student Athletes Wellbeing Survey will inform our decisions on our athletics and varsity programs this coming school year. And that kind of value is something that cannot be understated. Needless to say, we plan to have a follow-up rollout of this survey this coming school year. Another initiative that we had, which turned out to be quite fruitful, was the Grade 9 Varsity Pool Mood Form. This was inspired by the initiative of a number of our class moderators or class advisors who, throughout the school year, asked their students to periodically fill out mood forms. These mood forms were filled out during our morning check-ins, simply asking the students to choose an emoji about their predominant emotion for that day, whether it was joy or gratitude, sorrow, frustration, anger, what have you. They were also asked about anything that may be giving them some anxiety and if they wanted to schedule an appointment with a particular teacher or with a guidance counselor. In our team in grade 9 for the grade 9 varsity basketball team, we adapted that framework and we came up with our varsity basketball pool mood form. We had our players fill out the mood form right before every practice session. So we coaches could have data that would help us monitor their emotional or wellness levels on a regular basis. And if needed, help us identify and counsel students who needed some form of guidance, or mentorship, or intervention. This varsity basketball pool mood form helped us maximize our capacity as coaches to reach out to our players, to guide them, mentor them, and if needed, refer them to someone more equipped to process their experiences, thoughts, and emotions. Like the well-being survey, this is something we've resolved to continue this coming school year. And in fact, I urge all of you who are involved with student athletes to explore doing something like this as well. Now, born out of these, we've decided to also add meditation and kumustahan sessions to our regular training program. Coach Reggie Arumin, our head coach, would make sure at most times this past school year that we ended training sessions with a few minutes of meditation. And we plan to have more regular kumustahan sessions this coming school year to supplement our support for our players' wellness. In addition to these, we also plan to conduct open tryouts this coming school year to try and discover talented, interested, and most of all, committed individuals who want to join our pool of student athletes. We're also hoping we can find creative ways to have online competitions this school year together with an online sports festival where teams can showcase their skills and coaches can share their own insights and best practices with each other. And so there you go, my fellow teachers, formators, and coaches. I hope that even in some small way, my sharing of our practices this past school year has sparked some curiosity or desire in you to explore more ways to innovate your own programs and further help your student athletes. Let us mark this day by remembering who we are and how far we've come, in spite of all the trials this past year. And let's move forward armed with audacity, hope, faith, and our principles. Let us brave the challenges of the coming school year. Let it be said that when we were tested, we did not bend. We did not turn back. And with our eyes fixed on the horizon, on our goals, on our dreams, we accepted our call and carried forth our mission of coaching, mentoring, and forming our student athletes to excellence. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.